Washington Journal continues.
At our table this morning is Roger Stone, long time involved in politics at a national level. This year, he's helping Donald Trump in his bid for the White House. Where does it stand right now?
Well, Mr. Trump has said he'll make a decision at the end of February. He has formed a presidential exploratory committee. He has changed his registration to the Independence Party of New York, which is the Reform Party affiliate. He's made his first foray to Florida on the 15th of November. He's going to Hartford, Connecticut to meet with Reform Party leaders on the 1st of December, and then flying to Los Angeles to meet with Western Regional Reform Party members there. So he's actively exploring. He's posted a website. He's put forward his first major proposal, his national debt reduction proposal, and we shall see.
History shows us how difficult it is for a third-party candidate to make it to the White House. What is the success rate, do you think, and how do you plan to help this candidate get there?
Well, first of all, in the age of mass communications, all our politics is changing. We used to sit around tables like this and say, well, vice presidents don't get elected president. I mean, look at the success rate of that. And then, of course, George Bush got elected and broke that mold. Here's the fundamental question. Is the pop culture in this country more influential now than its institutions? There's no question that 20 years ago, somebody like Donald Trump, who is a real estate developer, who does come out from outside the political mold, not a congressman, not a U.S. senator, hasn't worked his way up, doesn't need campaign contributions from special interests. Could somebody like that be elected president? Ross Perot changed all that. Ross Perot was cruising to being elected president in 1992 before he self-destructed. I actually think my friend Pat Goodell in California is right. The revolution has already happened. We're in a position here where the voters are fed up with both parties. They're looking for new choices. And if the American people are presented a viable, different choice, they may just take it.
If you'd like to talk about Donald Trump and his bid for the White House, our phone numbers are on the screen. Here they are, 202-624-1111 for the eastern half of the U.S., 202-624-1115 if you're out west. And watching internationally, dial this number, 202-737-6734. What's the process for reaching the Reform Party nomination?
Well, I like to boil it down into 3 points, 3 steps, really. Step 1, you have to go get yourself on the ballot as an independent in the 29 states where the party is not recognized. That is an onerous task. It takes a lot of volunteers, it takes a lot of money, it takes national name identification. There's a number of individuals who thought about running who I think looked at that mountain and decided that it was too high to climb. I don't think, for example, that former Governor Lowell Weicker could achieve that. I don't think John Anderson can achieve that. I have serious questions whether Pat Buchanan can achieve that. I do think that the proper price tag, using a combination of paid signature collectors and volunteers, is somewhere around $8 million. But that's just step 1. That qualifies you for the next step, which is the national primary, the Reform Party, under their rules. And their rules are really they're very dynamic, they're very smart. They'll mail a ballot to any American who asks for one. So not only is every Reform Party member entitled to a ballot, those being defined as lists provided to the national chairman by the state Reform Party chairman, but anybody who signed any of those petitions to get you on the ballot as independent is entitled to a ballot. And any American who writes in and requests a ballot is entitled to one. That's democracy with a small d. I mean, that's how you build a party. And I'm betting that Donald Trump could bring more people to that party than anyone else.
Are we likely to see Pat Buchanan and Donald Trump debates?
Well, if Pat is successful in step 1, Mr. Trump has said that he'd be willing to debate. In other words, let's determine whether Pat Buchanan gets on the ballot as a candidate. I'm highly confident that Mr. Trump could do so, because, as you know, he is prepared to self-fund his campaign, and the first $10 million will come out of his own pocket to get on the ballot, as Ross Perot did in 1992. So, yes, I think you would see debates.
First call is from Arlington, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan, and good morning, Roger.
Good morning.
I'm a long-time reformer, and I've got three things I'd like to talk to you about.
Sure.
First of all, it's very, very distasteful and against everything the Reform Party stands for is all this name-calling that Donald Trump does. Secondly, I want to know whether or not Donald Trump will unequivocally support the party in the future and support the presidential candidate that we choose next year in Long Beach. And finally, I'm wondering why, and don't give me scheduling conflict as a reason, because I know he's got time, why won't he come to Texas, Arlington, Texas, this coming weekend for the Reform Party of Texas meeting that we're going to have down here? I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Well, that's a mouthful of questions. Let's take them one by one. If you read Mr. Buchanan's book, I think Mr. Trump's criticisms of him are accurate. The Reform Party is a fine vehicle. If you don't want to vote for Mr. Trump, don't vote for him. I would say that overwhelmingly the response that he's gotten from the fact that he's the first major political figure to come out and criticize Mr. Buchanan on his revisionist views on whether we should have stopped Adolf Hitler or not have been quite positive. It took John McCain and Elizabeth Dole 4 or 5 days later to issue their criticisms. Secondarily, no, I don't think, although he is very proud about the fact that he has joined the party, and he would like to support the party's nominee if he is not the party's nominee, I think he'd have serious problems supporting Pat Buchanan, given the things that Mr. Buchanan has written about Jews and blacks and Mexicans and his revisionist views of World War II. If Ross Perot were the nominee, I have little question Mr. Trump would feel very comfortable supporting Mr. Perot. He's a great admirer of Mr. Perot's, and the other day he told a reporter in my presence that this country would still have a national deficit if it weren't for Ross Perot, who kept that issue on the front burner. And I'm afraid we're not going to get to Texas this weekend, but we are going to get to Texas in the very near future and hope to meet with Reform Party leaders there.
Actually, there are a number of Reform regional events coming up in a very short order.
We're going to visit every region of the country to meet with Reform Party leaders, and we are, in fact, going to go to Texas. We do have a conflict on this weekend, but we do expect to meet with the Reform Party leaders there. And, you know, Trump is going to do this his way. He's going to say what he thinks. He's not prepackaged. He's not plastic. He's not scripted. And his attitude really is, since he's not a pal who has to have this office to top off his resume, if you like what he says, vote for him. If you like his economic plan, his debt reduction plan, which would do away with the national debt and allow us to save $200 billion in interest payments to fund tax cuts and Social Security, then support him. If you don't, that's okay with him too.
We've been talking a lot about tactics. Why are you supporting this man's quest for the White House?
Well, I've been active in American politics. I'm a veteran of 8 national presidential campaigns. I've reached the same view that many in the Reform Party have. The system is broken. The two parties really are in it together. You don't see campaign finance reform because despite all their rhetoric, neither one of them is for it. They like things just the way they are. The special interests here in Washington, D.C. really do control the public policy agenda. And I do think the American people are really ready for straight talk. They're ready for something different. I have worked for Donald Trump for almost 20 years now. I think he's a charismatic figure. I mean, he's kind of Ross Perot with charisma. In other words, I think you get common sense and straight talk, but I also think you get almost a Kennedy-esque kind of charisma that in the television age is very important in terms of attracting people. I think being self-funded, he could mount a heck of a campaign.
Next call for Roger Stone's from Bakersfield, California. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Stone.
Good morning.
Thanks for being on this morning.
Happy to be here.
I'm a founding member of United We Stand and a member of the Reform Party from the very beginning here in California. And I was curious, has Mr. Trump signed up to run and file the papers necessary to get on the ballot here in California?
Yes, we have. In fact, as far as I know, it's a two-step process. You can either essentially let the Secretary of State know that you wish to be listed, and we have been listed by the Secretary of State. In fact, Mr. Trump had to make a slight revision. He changed his ballot listing in California from Donald Trump to Donald J. Trump, which has always been luckier for him. Mr. Buchanan asked to be removed from the ballot in California because under the party rules, it's more of a beauty contest. It doesn't entitle you to delegates to the National Convention. Mr. Trump's going to run in the California Reform Party primary. He's going to campaign in California. He's very anxious to communicate his views to the voters in California on not only national debt reduction, but health care and education and other issues. And he plans to do that. As I indicated, he'll be in Los Angeles for meetings with Reform Party leaders in December, the 6th and 7th, actually, of December, and hopes to meet with several hundred Reform Party leaders there. I hope you're going to be among those who join us.
Next, Philadelphia.
Yes, good morning. I just want to relay an experience I had recently. In Philadelphia, Donald Trump was speaking at the University of Pennsylvania, and he just came off as being very arrogant and egotistical. And when it came time for him to introduce his girlfriend to come up and speak to the podium, he didn't refer to her by her name. He referred to her as his supermodel. How do you feel about that? Well,
first of all, I think that's kind of a joke between the two of them. That is, by the way, what she does for a living. She is indeed a supermodel. And I think that was kind of a personal thing between the two of them. What you see is what you get. He's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. He's self-made. He doesn't answer to any special interest, anybody other than himself. Are 34% of the American people ready for straight talk? We'll see. There's no question that he's not going to take any coaching. He's not going to change his approach because he wants to pander to this group or that group. That's just not Trump. He is outspoken. He is brash. He is unvarnished. All those things are true, and we shall see what the American people think. 1 million people visited his website, which you can see at www.donaldjtrump2000.com, just to read his economic plan. So somebody out there is interested.
Donald Trump will be on CNN later today if you would like to hear the potential candidate in his own words. Also, he's the subject of Maureen Dowd's column in the New York Times this morning, and where she essentially reports a conversation that she had. It's headlined, "Trump Shrugged." Let me read you one paragraph in here. This is a quote from Donald Trump. "For my entire life, I've watched politicians bragging about how poor they are, how they came from nothing, how poor their parents and grandparents were. And I said to myself, if they can stay so poor for so many generations, maybe this isn't the kind of person we want to be electing to higher office. How smart can they be? They're morons. There's a perception that voters like poverty. I don't like poverty. Usually there's a reason for poverty. Do you want someone who gets to be president and that's literally the highest paying job he's ever had?"
I think what he's referring to there is the fact that, maybe we need a president who is successful. Let me give you two examples. He has made the case over and over again that we're being taken to the cleaners bar, our trading partners. Our trade deficits are enormous, and they're moving in the wrong direction. So Trump says, who's negotiating these deals on behalf of the United States, and why aren't we doing a better job? Maybe we need a deal maker. Maybe we need somebody with entrepreneurial experience who knows to sit down and get the best deal for his client or his company, in this case, for his country. In Trump's case, however, you have somebody who has been very successful and then also came to the verge of losing it all. This is not somebody who made it and kept it, has just built on it. He faced financial disaster. He was $900 million in debt personally. He was $9 billion in debt if you looked at his companies. All of that caused, I think, by a government-created crisis in the real estate industry, courtesy of Senator Bill Bradley. Abrupt tax changes in 1986 caused the real estate industry in this country to crash, cost hundreds of thousands of people their jobs, destroyed the S&L industry, forced us to set up the Resolution Trust Corporation. It was an economic disaster that really hurt this country. That, by the way, was Senator Bradley's last big idea. This is a presidency of big ideas that he promises us. So Trump has had a certain resilience. I think people respect somebody who came to the edge of disaster, didn't quit, didn't walk away, didn't go bankrupt like so many others in this industry, who came back and rebuilt their business bigger and better than ever.
Kensington, Maryland.
Yes, Mr. Stone, two questions, please. First, I didn't take Mr. Trump seriously until I saw that interview with Larry King. And all of a sudden I said, my gosh, he's got great answers. He makes a lot of sense. And I started telling my friends who hadn't seen that interview, and they still didn't take him. They didn't take him seriously. So the first question is, are you finding that when people at first are skeptical, but when they actually hear Mr. Trump speak, they start to get won over? And then the second question is, in terms of you yourself, I seem to recall in the Washington area you were somehow tied in with some sleazy scandal, not reflecting on you, but some people did some sleazy things about you. I don't mean to be embarrassing, but could you just sort of refresh us, our memory of what that weird little thing was?
Well, let's take the first question first. Sure, inside the Beltway there's a certain snicker factor. And I think maybe early on a lot of people thought that this might be some kind of publicity stunt for Mr. Trump to sell his next book. He has a book coming out in December called The America We Deserve. It will tell you where Trump stands on trade and immigration and health care and taxes and the national debt, terrorism, foreign policy, strategic missile defense, and so on. It's not a dry policy book, though. I think you'll find it more interesting that it really is very much like his interviews. It's very irreverent. It's very direct. It tells you exactly what he thinks in kind of non-politically correct terms. So a lot of people thought maybe this was Trump's way of promoting a book. Well, he's had 3 New York Times bestsellers. His businesses, his casino gaming business, his real estate development business are doing phenomenally well. So he doesn't need to sell condos. He doesn't need to sell apartments. He doesn't need to promote his book. His businesses are doing fine. I think that, in fact, the more people see him, whether it's Larry King or whether it's Late Edition with Wolf Blitzer today at noon on CNN, or the Today Show or Dateline or any of these other national places that he appears, Good Morning America next week, the more people hear his views on the national debt or on the alcohol lobby or on taxes or on Social Security, the more they begin to realize that he's quite serious. And that he could really be, between his outspokenness, his national name identification, and his issue positions, he could be a formidable candidate. The incident that you refer to had to do when I was having some discussions with Senator Dole about joining his campaign. And there were some unfortunate, I think, allegations cooked up by the Democrats to keep me out of that campaign. I don't want to dwell on it. It's all out there on the public record. It doesn't much matter. At this point, I serve as in a volunteer capacity for Mr. Trump. I am not a paid political advisor. I'm a volunteer on his efforts, and I'm very proud to work for him because, frankly, I think he offers the American people something refreshing and new.
Our guest, Roger Stone, was himself profiled by the New York Times in a piece last week. Here it is in Public Lives. You mentioned earlier that you've been involved in 8 national presidential campaigns, all Republicans. Are you finished with the Republican Party?
Well, the question, I guess, to quote Ronald Reagan, is not whether I left the party, it's a question whether the party leaves me. I'd like to see a party that is that is fiscally and economically conservative, but socially more moderate. If the party demonstrates some tolerance for a broader spectrum of views in the area of social policy, I could very easily remain a Republican. I don't want to be part of a party that bashes immigrants or bashes gays or bashes African Americans or who takes extreme positions of intolerance on questions of social policy. I want a party that's economically and fiscally conservative, that is conservative on foreign policy and defense issues, but which is more, I think, tolerant on some of these other issues like immigration and like and civil rights. And if our party, my old party, comes around to that view, I'd still be comfortable calling myself a Republican. I find the Reform Party very interesting because I like their position on social issues, which is to say that that's up to the conscience of each individual. In other words, here's a party that is for government reform, campaign finance reform, for example, but reform in a number of other areas, but leaves social issues to the dictates of the conscience of the voters. Doesn't take a position. Is not a right-to-life party. I think that's very attractive to me. It's very attractive, I think, also to a lot of Americans.
We're talking about Donald Trump for president with Roger Stone. Next call is from Troy, Montana.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
What I was wondering is what Donald's positions are on, like the forest. Right now we got Al Gore that's definitely multi-use. He wants to lock it up in wilderness, and I was wondering how Donald Trump was seeing it.
Well, it's not something I've had a detailed discussion with him. He is a real estate developer, Therefore he has a kind of a deep-seated view that environmentalists very often go way too far. He also recognized that there are a lot of people who make money in the environmental lobby. He is a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. He's been very outspoken, for example, in his defense of the right to bear arms and the rights of hunters. I would have to get a more detailed answer for you other than to say I don't think you would ever call him a radical environmentalist.
Next, Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Stone, I have a couple comments and questions.
All right.
As a founding member of the Reform Party, I'm just amazed that a man like Donald Trump is getting so much press without being a declared candidate for our party. I receive almost daily email from him, not about issues he supports, but only maligning one of our declared candidates. Even after reformers chastised him for negative comments, he continues. And listen to him on previous appearances on the different networks. It is clear to me that he has no clue what our party is all about. And my questions to you, Mr. Stone, is how can Donald Trump, an avid supporter and admirer of President Clinton, set an example for our young people today? And what has he spoken out about before his rise to political stardom to get me to believe that his sincerity about supporting our issues?
All right, let's take that piece by piece. He's going to disagree with Mr. Buchanan on a series of issues. I don't know specifically what you refer to, but if the question, for example, is America's role in World War II and Mr. Buchanan's affinity for Adolf Hitler, I'm sorry, Mr. Trump is going to disagree in emails, on television, on the radio. If you think that disagreement on major issues is negative, then, you know, don't support Mr. Trump. I would invite you not to support him. Secondarily, he's not a supporter nor an avid admirer of President Clinton's. He's been quite a bitter critic of Mr. Clinton's. And therefore, you know, perhaps you're engaging in the same kind of name-calling that you criticize him for. And thirdly, I don't think he would be going out to meet Reform Party members. I don't think he would go out and solicit the support and change his own registration to the Reform Party affiliate in New York if he weren't serious. Let me point out to you in 1992 that Ross Perot ran as an independent. Mr. Trump has said that he's prepared to spend $100 million of his own money. He certainly doesn't need the $13 million that he would get as the Reform Party nominee. So he has that option. Because of his high regard for Governor Ventura, because of his high regard for Ross Perot, he has chosen to join the Reform Party, and therefore I think he offers the Reform Party something. I can't think of anybody else who would help fund candidates for Congress or the U.S. Senate in the Reform Party. I can't think of anybody else who might expand that institution, which, thanks to Ross Perot, exists. Thanks to Ross Perot's funding, is viable today. So you're going to see a spirited contest. He's going to disagree with Mr. Buchanan on his views on, say, gays or blacks or Mexicans or Adolf Hitler and a host of other issues. I don't think that's negative. I think that's issue contrast. I think that's a difference. Any fair-minded person who would read those words, I think, in Mr. Buchanan's recent book would recognize that, you know, Mr. Trump has a valid point.
Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Hello. I'd like to make 2 points. Number one, I have Pat Buchanan's book, and I think the mischaracterization of Pat is really rude. Pat, he basically defined contingencies for which we could have stayed out of World War II. Those contingencies obviously didn't happen. Therefore, by the time we went to war, we had to go to war, and Pat Buchanan is not in disagreement with that. Secondly, I am a Ludwig von Mises disciple, and paying off the debt has been impossible since 1913. I'm not sure if Donald Trump has any understanding of the Federal Reserve System, but evidently he doesn't.
Would you tell our audience who hasn't heard of Ludwig von Mises a little bit about why you follow him?
Well, he is basically a libertarian. Of course, he's deceased now, and he runs, or they have the Mises Institute. He's fiscally libertarian, pretty much a capitalist, And the Mises Institute does a good job of preaching about the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve System. There's a congressman down there in Texas by the name of Congressman Ron Paul, and he really covers this really well. And since 1913, when Woodrow Wilson passed the Federal Reserve Act, paying down the debt has been impossible. Currency is based off of debt. Money is debt. It's a facade. It's a sham.
Thanks very much.
Let's take your question in two parts. First of all, you're right. I've also read Mr. Buchanan's book, as has Mr. Trump. He says we could have just let Hitler take all the properties to his east, all the territories to east, and he would have left us alone. Well, first of all, what about the Jews and Catholics and Gypsies that he would have exterminated in the east? Or I guess we're supposed to say that that's okay. Secondarily, in 1936, he built a bomber called the America. He didn't do it because he liked us or admired us. He did it because as soon as he finished in the east, he intended to move west. It's unrealistic. It's Neville Chamberlain. I mean, if you believe Neville Chamberlain was right, and therefore you could just appease Hitler by letting him have Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and he'd leave you alone, that view was kind of disproved in World War II. But I think it's an accurate depiction of what Mr. Buchanan says. I've also read Human Action, as has Mr. Trump. 1913, the tax-based system only taxed the wealthy, and only taxed the wealthy until World War II. It was only in World War II when we had a mass-based tax system. The countries had enormous prosperity, but 90% of the wealth in this country is controlled by 10% of the people, many of whom, most of whom, the majority of whom have doubled their net worth in the last 2 years. So the national debt could be reduced by a one-time net worth tax on the wealthiest individuals, and at 14%, where Mr. Trump has pegged it, would, I think, go a long way towards raising the revenues necessary to pay off the national debt. That in turn would save you $200 billion a year, annually, in interest payments, or around that, and would allow you to take $100 billion and put it into tax relief and put another $100 billion into the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, a lot of Wall Street economists have said, well, Trump's analysis is incorrect. It wouldn't raise the $5.7 trillion necessarily. It would only raise $3 trillion. And you know, who says that the value of wealth in America is $50 trillion? All economists are guessing, folks. They're all guessing. The word assumption means no one knows. The point here is that Trump has put forward an idea, a concept, to pay down the national debt and save us those interest payments. Where's the Bradley plan? Where's the Bush plan? Where's the McCain plan? Where's the Gore plan? It doesn't really matter whether he's off by a couple billion dollars. What does matter is that there's a positive plan that, if put in place, would begin to pay down the national debt. And no other candidate that I've seen has put forward any such plan. They're all kind of tinkering around the edges. I'm also a great admirer of Von Mises. It's tough to get through Human Action, but if you can do it, he is absolutely brilliant.
The press has dubbed this proposal, which is the centerpiece of the Trump plan, the Robin Hood proposal. Fair?
Well, it's important to note that it also repeals the federal inheritance tax. In other words, all wealthy people are going to get taxed at 55% at death. And it doesn't just hurt wealthy people, it hurts the successful small businessman and woman, the farmer or the guy who is, has a family-owned dry cleaner in Queens and wants to pass on the fruits of their labor to their children. Uncle Sam will get most of it under the current system. Under Trump's proposal, you essentially trade a 14.5%, or 14.25% one-time net worth tax for a 55% estate tax or inheritance tax. It's a very smart trade-off, and economists as brilliant as Dr. Alan Sinai have said it's an interesting and innovative idea. Rather than haggle about the exact value of wealth in America, which is impossible to put a number on and be exactly accurate because so much of it is privately held that we don't know what the value of wealth is. We can only estimate. But here is a mechanism that would bring down the national debt.
Waterford, Michigan. You're next for Roger Stone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just have a couple comments for Mr. Stone. In the first place, where would the money actually come from? You're going to tax all these mega rich people at 14%, which means they're going to have to sell off many of their assets, which undoubtedly they're going to take overseas with them. there is no way they're going to let that happen. And who's going to buy these assets?
Okay.
Where is the money going to come from?
All right, let me try to address the question. First of all, you're right that not all extremely wealthy people are entirely liquid and able to pay their tax at one time. But in the case of the inheritance tax, we allow people to pay their inheritance tax over time. 10 years in some cases an estate has to pay the tax. First of all, if you paid off the national debt, interest rates would plummet. With no national debt, you would have a boom economy. You can't just assume here a static economy. Pay off the national debt and cut income tax rates on working people, you'll have a boom economy. Capital always follows opportunity. Wealthy people wouldn't leave, they would come because there would be so many economic opportunities in the United States with a boom economy. Now, you're right, you wouldn't want to jolt the system by requiring people, as they did in the 1986 tax bill, to pay their taxes entirely overnight. But I'm not sure that the rules for wealthy people should be any different than they are for everybody else. Let me explain something to you. If on April 15th you don't have the money to pay your taxes, you have two choices. You can borrow it, you can sell something and pay them, or you can work out a deal with the IRS to pay them over time. Now, if you're making $25,000 a year and those rules are good for you, why aren't they good for you if you're making $10 million a year? As far as moving income offshore, it is, of course, illegal. Not to move assets offshore, but to hide income offshore. The IRS deals with people who do that. But again, a boom economy would induce people to stay here because the opportunities would be so great. If you could, in fact, do away with the national debt, interest rates would plummet, tax rates would be cut, and the economy would boom like never before.
How would Donald Trump, as a reform president and no constituency in Congress, get this or any legislative proposal through the Congress?
Well, as Ronald Reagan said, if you can't make them see the light, you can make them feel the heat. The idea of paying off the national debt and cutting income tax rates and saving Social Security has the potential to be a very powerful and popular idea. At the end of the day, once you actually refined it some and put it into comprehensive legislation, get the very best economic minds to try to determine as best you could what the value of wealth in America is and what such an income tax, or pardon me, such a one-time net worth tax would raise. I think that the voters would find this idea very interesting. I saw Dick Morris the other day said it was the first new idea of Campaign 2000. I think that's accurate. It reflects some fresh thinking, and I must tell you, within the Reform Party, it has been very well received. The national debt is one of the principal issues of the Reform Party. Trump has addressed it. Others have not. I'm waiting to see what other candidates have to say.
We have time for two more calls for Roger Stone on Donald Trump's potential candidacy. Next is Brookville, Maryland.
Good morning, Mr. Stone.
Good morning.
I would like to ask two questions. One, what has Mr. Trump done to help the poor? And what specifically he's going to do if he becomes the president in helping the poor?
Well, first of all, Mr. Trump has created hundreds of thousands of jobs in his business. I'm not sure that he isn't the only individual who could say this, who's running for president. This is, after all, a real estate developer. But he has created hundreds of thousands of jobs. And I think the single best thing he can do for the poor is twofold. Under his national debt reduction plans, the working poor would get the deepest tax cut, the deepest income tax cut. And secondarily, a boom economy would help everybody. It would create opportunity for everyone, particularly the people at the bottom of the economic ladder. So in Trump, you have somebody who's a job creator and whose economic plan is specifically addressed at the poorer taxpayers, poorer people, as well as the middle class.
Chicago.
Yeah, good morning, C-SPAN. God bless C-SPAN. I want to make a couple quick comments about Donald Trump's plan here. I think it's dangerous to the working people of America, this idea that you're going to cut the inheritance tax. If money is power and money corrupts, why would we want to let people with billions of dollars keep all their money? The idea is to create employment, and if you give people too much money, I don't think their thought process will be quite right. But a couple quick comments here also about, now wait a minute,
I don't understand your comment, that's
well,
all.
I want to talk about Donald Trump and free trade and WTO and GATT and all. He's for that, and we're against that. Okay?
No, hold on. I don't know where you get that. First of all, he's not for WTO, he's not for NAFTA, and he's not for GATT. And if you read his book, you'll see all that. Go back to your first comment, because I want to understand it. The inheritance tax is levied on everybody, not just wealthy people. Whereas the one-time 14.5% net worth tax that he proposes to pay off the national debt would only be levied on people with a net worth of $10 million or over, excluding their principal residence. So to take your premise that too much money makes people make bad decisions, I think that the inheritance tax reduction would benefit everybody, not just the wealthy, whereas the people who have the most would pay the most under Trump's plan, which of course is the entire basis for our current tax code, where if you have more and make more, you pay more. Trump is not for WTO, he's not for GATT, and he's not for NAFTA. He doesn't think we're getting free trade or fair trade today. He thinks that if the economy turns down, you will see the negative impact of all those international trade agreements.
This morning, U.S. News is saying the age of faith and values is upon us in American politics. Would America be ready for a twice-divorced candidate?
Well, of course, Ronald Reagan was divorced, and it didn't seem to hurt his candidacy. I think that in Trump's case, you have somebody who is publicly known and who is not claiming to be the family values candidate. Someone who says, look, my life is an open book. I don't drink alcohol. I've never had a glass of alcohol in my life. I've never had a cigarette in my life. I don't drink coffee. I've never had coffee in my life. I've never taken any illegal drugs of any kind. I have been married twice to women that I still care for. I have 4 wonderful children. I am single, and I do like beautiful women, and I do respect women, and I do date. So everything there is known. It is known. He is not claiming to be something he's not, like certain other candidates may be. So yes, I think that there are a third of the American people who may find that kind of honesty refreshing. He's not trying to claim anything other than the facts.
Roger Stone has been involved in national politics for the past 25 years. This year he is advising Donald Trump on a potential bid for the White House, and we thank him for being here to take your calls today. Thanks for coming in.
Happy to be here.
During our final segment of this Sunday morning, we're going to talk about the history of the Marine Corps. We'll be right back.